So, Gerald, for those people not familiar with what you do for a living, could you introduce yourself and tell us what you do?
Yeah, for a living, it's hard to make a living in music, so I do three different things, basically. One is DJing, second is running Jazzman Records record label, and the third one is selling old records, mostly via my website.
Now, that's a very modest way of putting it, because Gerald's known amongst crate diggers the world over as a pretty well-known record dealer. And how long have you been doing that for?
Second-hand records about 15 years now or something, since the early 90s for sure.
And I mean, that really is a culture in itself, but from how you got into it, did you come at it from just a music fan perspective, or was it a business decision? How did you find yourself being like a record pimp for people, basically?
Well, basically, in those days, it was hard to get records in London, which is where I'm based, and the only way you could do it really properly was by paying a lot of money to a lot of the record dealers and getting ripped off in the process, or you could go to America and buy the records yourself. And so basically that's what I ended up doing. I just went to America, saved up some cash, went out there, and that was in the days when you could actually find a lot of records in quantity for pretty cheap. So that's what I did. I just went out there because I really liked music, and I just felt the compulsion to go out there and just do it myself and find the records. And once you find some and you see another one that's worth some money, you might want to buy that and see if you can sell it and use the money to go and buy more records, and it just multiplies like that.
And when you say the music, what type of music are we talking about?
This is mostly jazz music or funk music, or funky jazz, or Latin or fusion, basically black American music from the 60s and early 70s.
And when you're talking about, records that you can find for cheap that are worth, I mean, who decides how much a record is worth? Is it you?
That's a good question. I suppose in those days, some of the prices are set by record dealers. They had an idea of what they were worth, and there were lists, because some record dealers have been doing it for quite a while. And so there's a general understanding of what certain records were worth. If you found one that had never really been listed or people didn't really know about, then you could sort of, you'd listen to it and you'd use your own ears, basically. You'd get an idea of how rare it was. You'd match it up against how good the record was. If it was really rare and it was really good, then you could put quite a high price on it, because the demand would increase. It's literally just supply and demand. It's as simple as that. The demand is much higher for the good records, and if the supply is low, then it means the price is high, and vice versa as well. No one really wants rubbish records, and no one wants really common ones, because they can find them anyway, so the price is quite low. So it literally is a classic supply and demand situation.
Now, a lot of people, and producers especially, obviously buy records from you for breaks and stuff, but that's not really the reason that you got into the music, right? You're more about the actual content of the record itself.
Yeah, I was just purely into the music, like anyone else. I just wanted to get records, because I just love the music. And once you've heard one, you want to hear another one, you hear another one, and you want to find out about more, and you just want to just get more and more records and hear more and more music, because you're just into it so much. I wasn't the only one. A lot of people were, and they're the people I ended up selling to, and I did that so much that eventually you can make a living out of it.
I mean, to people that aren't necessarily from that culture or from that generation, it can seem like a bit of an elitist culture, this thing of like selling records for 250 quid or $500 or whatever, and always trying to hide the label and finding the thing that the next man's got. I mean, to what extent is it, is it an elitist culture, or is it something that anyone can kind of get into?
Well, it can be elitist, yeah, and sometimes it's a good thing, sometimes it's a bad thing. It's good in the ways that if a certain pedigree, high pedigree, or a high value is put on a rare record, then it means that people are going to value it more, and therefore they're going to go out and look for it, and they're going to try and make new discoveries, and they've got an incentive to go out and try and find new things or rare things or expensive things, because they can get the money for it, basically, which means that new discoveries are going to be made. But on the other hand, it can be bad in the sense that people buy the records or the expensive records for the wrong reasons. They do it just to massage their own egos, or to just feel good about it, or to show off to their friends or something, which isn't necessarily a good thing. But the best thing about the fact that they could be rare or expensive is the fact that people will take the effort to go out to find the things. Otherwise, half the records that I've reissued that a lot of people really enjoy would never have been discovered.
So let's talk about that. The other facet to your business and what you do mainly now is a record label. How long have you been running that, and what's it called?
Jazzman Records, the label started in '98, so 8 years now, and we started off with a 7-inch single. I didn't bring one here, but we put it out on one of the CDs, Kathleen Emery. Maybe we can play it now if you want.
Yeah, let's play that. This is certainly the first record that, well, it's the first one you put out, but I remember when this came out. And how did you come across this record, and why did you decide to reissue it on a 7-inch?
Well, there's a record dealer in Boston. He's sold everything now. His name is Boston Bob. And I used to do a lot of trades with him. And he first played it to me for the B-side, which is the version of Evil Ways, a Santana song. And I like the A-side a bit better. And it turned out that when I brought it back, no one had ever heard of it in London, and I DJ'd it in Munich. I remember I had a really good response, even though it's a bit of a quirky one, as you'll hear. And I thought, well, if I'm the only person who's got this record, and a lot of people really like it, then it makes sense to be able to reissue it in such a way that everyone who likes the record will be able to hear it, instead of just me in my bedroom. So that's why we put it out on single. And I put it out on a 7-inch single because, one, that was the format it originally came out in, and secondly, because I thought, well, if no one's going to buy it, then I'm not going to lose too much money, because 7s were pretty cheap to make compared to CDs or albums or 12s or whatever.
So that's Kathleen Emery, Sometimes I Feel Like a Motherless Child, right? And also you put it on, you decided to do CDs as well as this stuff, right?
Yeah, I didn't do any CDs to start off with, but once I'd done 10 or so 7-inch singles, it just made sense to put some on CD, because not everyone's got a record player. Simple as that, basically.
Yeah.
And also it makes business sense, because you can sell the same records all over again. And, you know, I have to stay in business. So although I'm not a CD person, I'm much more a vinyl person, then, you know, it does make sense to spread the music, you know, using whatever medium it takes.
I mean, one thing that strikes me about the way you do your stuff, though, is it is completely in respect to the artist. I mean, there's amazing sleeve notes in all of the stuff that you do, and I remember you saying it takes like 3 years to put together one of these comps.
Yeah. The funk ones take, the last one took 3 years to do. The one before that did. Well, the reason behind that is, you know, a lot of the research is original. We don't look on the internet to get the information that we put about the artists on there. We have to meet each artist individually and interview them to get the information, and that takes a long time, not just to find them, but we have to go to America to meet them and do the interview too. And we see that as being really important, because the type of music that we're putting out, it would otherwise be forgotten about, because a lot of it's so obscure and so rare that people would never otherwise know about it. So we take a lot of time and effort, one, to find out about it in the first place, two, to actually go and reissue the stuff properly, because otherwise it would just never get known about, it would be forgotten about completely, and the only people who would know about it would be the collectors and the DJs. But we see the music that we're doing as being of proper historical significance for the history of music in the States, not just in the States, but the whole world, especially the funk stuff we're doing, because that's the basis of a lot of modern music. It's not just James Brown or Stevie Wonder or Aretha Franklin. There's a lot of local artists that never got it big, and we see it as very important that they get to some of the limelight that they deserve, that they never got in the first place. And that's one of the main reasons why we do it. If you go to like a record store and you get a CD on, I don't know, rockabilly or doo-wop or reggae, you can get thousands of them, and all the liner notes, that it's all been documented and you can read all about it. But with the funk stuff, there was very, very little a few years ago. If you bought a funk CD, it would just have, I don't know, Earth, Wind and Fire on it, or Stevie Wonder or something, which is all very well, but there's a hell of a lot more to it than that, and that's what we're trying to show by putting out the CDs that we do.
The business side of it's important as well, because there's a lot of comps out there putting out rare stuff and funk and soul and stuff, and it's all from the perspective of wanting to share it with people. However, I know that, you know, not everyone's business is straight, and sometimes it's very hard to track down the original artist, especially in the case of people that have only cut 145 or a couple of singles or whatever. And that's quite important to you, isn't it, to make sure that all of that is good?
Yeah, it is hard. I mean, it took us 5 years to find one guy called Arthur Monday, for instance. He made a couple of records, but released on a small Californian label. We tracked him down to a nursing home in Louisiana. And I don't do a lot of the tracking down. I've got to give credit to Malcolm Cato, who does most of the work. You know, it means staying up till the early hours in the morning and ringing 50 people with the same name in the phone book and finding out that, you know, even though he spoke to 50 people, none of them happened to be that person. It really is painstaking work, what he does to do it. But, you know, it's worth it in the end, because when you actually do come across that guy and you go and meet him and you do the interview, it's, you know, it's really good to meet someone who appreciates the fact that you've spent all the time and effort to find them, and that they made a record, say, 30 years ago that they'd never ever think would ever see the light of day again, and then you're telling them they're going to get actually paid for it. Because sometimes they think that they have to pay you to get it put on a CD, but you say, no, we pay you to put it on the CD, and they get royalties from it, and they actually get recognition for it for the first time in all that time, because even at the time when they released it, it may never have got a proper release, or they might have got ripped off or whatever. So it's very satisfying and fulfilling to meet these old guys, even if it takes a lot of work and effort to go and meet them. And like I say, you know, it's you know, I see it as an important part of documenting the musical history of the States. If we don't do it, no one else will. And you know, I think there's Stone's Throw in the States, and there's another company, I forget the name, who take the effort to do it. Not many people do. But you know, I suppose you could say there's a gap in the market as well, you know, because we're the only ones that can be bothered to do it like that. Soul jazz do it as well, to a certain extent as well, yeah.
Have you got any particular good stories of, or any particular case studies of people that you've tracked down? And
well, that Arthur Monday one, that was pretty good after 5 years looking for him. And, you know, being at the nursing home and he wasn't in, and then he suddenly appeared in his wheelchair. And, you know, it was good to see the grin on his face. It was good meeting James Bell from the Highlighters, because he did a song called Funky 16 Corners, and he started doing the dance in his living room. It's good meeting people like Billy Larkin, whose Hammond organ was on the porch, and it was all covered in dust and cobwebs and covered in tarpaulin, and he ripped that off and started playing on it for us, even though it wasn't plugged in. If I think of one that springs to mind, I'll let you know in a sec. But basically, it's great meeting those old guys after having mostly had very little success, and someone coming out of the woodwork and traveling from England. They're usually pretty chuffed that someone's taken an interest in them again, especially because the music they made, it's absolutely properly good stuff. A lot of the funk stuff they did. We don't do the things that I mean, a lot of the funk music that was made in them days, a lot of it is pretty bad. A lot of it, you know, deserves never to be heard because it's not really that good. But we just look for the really properly good ones, and I think it's a shame that they never got a lot of them never got the success that they could have had or deserved back when it was first released. And a lot of the guys, they know that it was good, but for one reason or another, you know, the stories of which we put in the CDs, they never actually got the dues that they deserved.
Have you got an example of one of those type of records we could play?
We could play this one, Fred Williams. Some people might recognise this because Tyler McQuarrie sampled it recently. Track number 7. Fred Williams. Yeah.
Just a minute.
anyone recognise that? Do you recognise the sample? Talib Kweli used it. I can't remember what the song is, but yeah, that's the one.
This is from an album called Midwest Funk 45s from Tornado Alley. I mean, all of these CDs, there's so much care and love gone into researching them. There's like a mini essay on each record. It must take you years to do these things.
Yeah, that one took us 2 or 3 years to do as well. That's the American issue. Stone's Throw in the States, released it in the States. So, yeah, it takes ages because, like I say, we have to meet each of the artists or producers in their own right to get to get an interview with them and get the story from them, because there's no information otherwise on the internet. There's nothing at all. So, we try and do it properly. Otherwise, the story never gets told.
Now, in here, there's all of the pictures. It's all of the pictures of all of the records are all 45s. They're all 7-inch records, and I mean, people pay a lot of money for albums, but the real money that people spend is always 45s. That's where the real super expensive record buying market is, right?
It does tend to be that way, actually. Yeah.
Why is that?
Probably because if you're looking at a 7-inch single, there's this one song in there and it's 3 minutes long, which means that, and a lot of these singles were independently made. They're quite rare. It's very, they probably only made a few hundred at the time. The band probably only made that one single. So that 7-inch single that's rare and expensive probably encapsulates the sole artistic output of that band. It's just been condensed into that one 7-inch single. They didn't do any other singles, they didn't do an album, they didn't do anything else, just that one thing. So the concentration of that musical legacy is just in that one little 3-minute song. And because it's concentrated into that one little thing, I think that has a lot to do with the value of the art that's gone into it. If there's a whole album, or if they did loads and loads of albums, then it's spread across a lot of output. So it means that I think the value of the artisticness is being spread across as well. So it's more diluted. So I think that's why people value 7-inch singles a lot more, because of the concentration of the output into one specific little thing that's just 3 minutes long. It's a concentrated thing.
What's the most expensive 7-inch record you've heard of? I mean, what's
I've heard of? Well, Northern Soul records tend to sell for more money than most things. Them and garage records as well. There's some garage collectors and Northern Soul collectors don't bat an eyelid spending thousands and thousands of pounds.
On one 3.5-minute song?
Yeah.
Like, for example?
I couldn't tell you. I don't know anything about Northern or garage. But I know collectors in stories, and you look up on the high prices on eBay, and it's not uncommon to see records like that. For funk things, they don't sell for that many, but it's not uncommon to see a 4-figure 7-inch single for funk music, which is the kind of stuff that I'm involved in dealing with. But for Northern, yeah, there's a lot less records and a lot more people, so the demand is a lot higher. And if the supply is low, then it's simple as that, supply and demand.
You might not want to answer this one. What's the most you've ever paid for a record?
I'm not answering. I mean, I'll pay a lot of money for a record if I really want it, but I can make excuses by saying I want to reissue it or something, so I'm allowed in that
What's
sense.
the most that anyone's paid you for one record?
I've been paid a couple of £1,000 for a single before on a couple of occasions, which that's what the guy wanted to pay, and that's probably pretty much what it's worth. If there's only like 1 or 2 known copies in the world, then that's the price.
Mm. And after 15 years or 20 years of buying records, and do you still have that buzz of, when you hear a record that you've got to have, that nothing's going to stand in your way?
Yeah, I wouldn't mind a copy of that Fred Williams we just played then. I don't have a copy of that. Sometimes, if a record gets under your skin and it's inside you can't get out your head, you just got to have it. Having it on a CD isn't the same. You've got to have the original artifact. And it can take months or years to find it. You might have to dig deep in the pockets to get it once you've got an opportunity. And if you'd missed that opportunity, you may never ever see it again. So sometimes you just got to bite the bullet. But there's one thing about spending all those money on records. Some people balk at paying those sort of prices. But if you don't see it as money, for instance, anyone can do it. Anyone can find some cheap records, sell them on eBay, put the money in your PayPal account, do that a few more times, and eventually you've got enough money in your PayPal account to buy the record you want. It's just a matter of, do you want to do the work to find records, and can you be bothered to do all that buying and selling stuff to get the money to be able to pay for things like that? And most people can't be bothered. They'd rather go out and do what else they have to do. It's all about, you do need a certain amount of dedication, and you have a certain mentality about it. But the real trick, like I was saying earlier, is not to spend a lot of money on a record. The trick is to find it cheap. There's nothing clever or big or clever or spending £1,000 on a record. If you can find that record for 50 cents or $1, then that's where the cleverness is. That's the best way to do it. But having said that, I must emphasize the fact that it's all very well finding a record like that for $1, a really rare one, but if we meet the artists and they've got a rare record, one example, for instance, is the James Bell guy I was talking about. He had this copy of Funky 16 Corners, and it's worth, £1,000 or whatever. And we said, do you want to sell it? And he said, oh yeah, you can have it for $10. And I couldn't take it for $10 because sooner or later he would find out we were worth a lot of money, and then he'd start hating us, and we'd be taking advantage of him. So we couldn't do anything like that. Some people would, but that's not the idea. So we do pay the artists a proper price for the records that we get off them, so that we're not taking advantage of them.
What do you say to people that just think it's like, it might as well be collecting stamps or marbles or something? I mean, to some people, that obsessive culture just seems like hoarding.
Well, to a stamp collector, they've got their reasons for collecting stamps. I might think they're mad, but they probably think I'm mad, so it's each to his own, really. Everyone's got their own reasons for doing stuff. Personally, with the music, I believe that the musicians created the records in the first place and the music in the first place to express themselves and to get people to listen to it, to get people to enjoy it and to dance to it. And so for a collector to buy a record and keep it to themselves, or for a DJ to cover it up and not tell anyone what it is, I think that's being disrespectful to the very essence of why the music was made in the first place. So I don't cover any of my records up. Another reason why I do the reissues is to spread the music, because otherwise it would never get the opportunity to be spread in the first place. So that's one reason why I do the reissues. And I don't really have too much respect for collectors who just hoard things in their bedrooms and never DJ it or never try and do anything with it. So everyone's got their reasons for doing things, but I believe in spreading it. That's one of the main reasons and philosophies behind the label that I do.
I must say that 90% of the stuff that I hear on your reissues, on your sevens, I've never ever heard before. I mean, can we play a couple of things just to give an idea of what you do? Play the records.
Oh, what, the 7s ones? Yeah.
How long's that been? So that's been since '98. And how many sevens have you put out?
I think we're just about to start on the 53 or 54. Right. So that's roughly, what's that? 7 or 8 a year or something? I mean, they're trying to do one every month, but I don't know, it's not easy. This is a song called New Generation by the Universals. Another funk one.
Is that cool?
Universals, a song called New Generation.
Now, a lot of the beat makers that are sitting in this room hear that record in a very particular way, and certain bits of that record just, spring out. And I know that a lot of producers over the years have always traditionally come to see you when they're in London. Who are some of the people that have bought breaks from you before?
They don't really buy breaks from me anymore. They used to in the 90s. It's sort of changed a lot in the last few years. But hip-hop producers, a lot of them buy drums, or have done in the past, rather. PM Dawn, he's one of those guys who wants every single record that's got a drum break ever made in the world ever. And, even if it's a really rubbish record otherwise, you know, he'll just pay whatever it takes for it. Pete Rock bought some records. 45 King, you know, this was, but like, I haven't seen a lot of these people for quite a while now, you know. The guy from Public Enemy, I forgot his name, whose record collection burnt up. That's a bit grim, but anyway. But yeah, like the guy who was here before, you know, he says a lot of people don't sample records anymore, but they make their own beats. But anyway, so yes.
And are you into contemporary music?
I don't really have much time to get into it. I'm stuck in the past, basically. Generally, not so much. I mean, like I say, I really am stuck in the old days. I'm much more traditional in the sense that, you know, I like a band. I like to feel the combination of a group of people playing together, musical instruments. You know, and I even prefer records to live bands as well. And but a lot of the time, because I'm so busy researching and listening to old stuff, I just don't have the time to get into new stuff. But I think my current favourite band is Broadcast from Birmingham in England.
That's just interesting because a lot of people that are into certainly the type of music that you've just been playing, you know, also come to it from a b-boy angle as well and from a breaks angle, but that's not really a big thing for you, is it? It's just about the record in its entirety.
Yeah, pretty much so. Yeah, I mean, I can understand why people like things for certain reasons like that, but everyone comes at music from a different angle. Everyone's got their own agenda. Me personally, it just depends if you can, whether you feel it inside or not. If you know, whether it gets under your skin. That's what. That's the criteria for a good record to me, whether it's new or old. You know, if it gets inside you and you can't keep it out of your head, and you have to have it, then that's what it's all about, as far as I'm concerned.
And when you play out, do you just strictly play old music?
I only play sevens, mostly because I can't be bothered to lug LPs and 12s around. And yeah, I only play old music. I mean, there's some new things but I only if it comes out on 7-inch single, mostly because, you know, like I say, it has to fit in my box. And that's basically why I get booked, because people want to hear the sevens, people want to hear the old music that I've got. They wouldn't book me otherwise.
How is like the development of like technology, you know, MP3, people buying their stuff online and all that kind of that? Has that affected your business?
I think it may have done. You know, some of the records that we have got the copyright to be able to have them downloadable, and people do download them. So there is that element. But I think with most downloadable music, people tend to look for more modern things. It's very much more a recent concept. And I think if people like the old music of the manner that we're talking about here, people do like to hear it on an old format, i.e. a 7-inch single or an LP or even a CD. You can call that old now, can't you? So I'm doing okay still manufacturing sevens. I mean, a lot of people buy them quite simply because they are different, and because it is, you know, a change from the norm, if you like. You know, the people may see them as being novelty things now, but you know, I still make enough and sell enough to make it worthwhile. So, you know, I must be doing something right, and people must still like them. Otherwise, you know, no one would buy them.
I mean, you know, obviously DJs have played a big part in keeping vinyl culture alive and healthy. And as that, even DJing starts to move more into the realm of Serato and computer DJ and all the rest of it, I mean, do you think will there always be a community of people looking to buy rare records? Will that ever die, or will they become like 78s?
Well, I think it probably will die sooner or later, eventually. But there's just so many records out there. You know, there must be billions of the things, and they can't just disappear overnight. There's literally, you know, so many of them. And even if most people do move on to computers or onto more modern forms of music storage and playing, you know, there's always going to be people that who like music regardless of the format. And if it means they have to listen to it on a single, then they will. I think they are. You know, you can't deny the fact that they're on the decrease. But that doesn't mean to say that they're going to be gone forever. You know, there's too many of them around for that to happen.
I mean, you hear a lot of people having hundreds of thousands of records and legendary collections, but I know that a lot of serious collectors just have the wheat and no chaff, right? How many records do you have at home?
Singles, I've got about 1,000. Albums, probably 3,000 or something like that. That's enough. If I get more, then I'll probably get rid of some. I can't really cope with more than that. I mean, you hear some people having 30, 40, 50 odd thousand or more, and it just do my head in. I mean, where do you keep them? How do you know where everything is? How do you know? I think I've got the right sort of size to be able to manage. I don't need more than that.
So people can do mail order off the internet for the sevens, right?
Yeah,
and,
I mean,
and the CDs.
Yeah, we got distribution as well. You know, they do get sold all over the world. We do have our own website where we sell them before, like about a month before you can get them in the shops, which is, you know, one marketing issue that we've got, which works pretty well because we get, you know, full value for it first, and people can get it for like a month before it's in the shops before, so that, you know, they can have it before anyone else, sort of thing. So yeah, we've been doing that for since the late 90s now as well, and it works out pretty good.
And you DJing regularly?
Mostly gigs in Europe, yeah. Mostly clubs in Spain, Germany, France, Italy, wherever. Not very much in England, but, you know, like just like a couple of times a month.
Do you want to talk us through just a couple of the projects that you did, like the Florida Funk and the, you know, because there's different themes, isn't there? So
yeah. What happened like a few years ago, DJ Shadow was around and he was playing lots of singles that he'd found in Texas. And it suddenly dawned on me that we should maybe do a compilation of them. So we did this album called Texas Funk, which is made up of all of funk 45s from the state of Texas. And it didn't, you know, it wasn't like a great leap of knowledge to realize that, you know, we could do that for other states in America as well. So we did a Midwest one, which was the next one on the agenda, and then we did a Florida one, which isn't released yet, and that's this one here. And you know, these are the ones that we say took us quite a long time, you know, several years to get the copyrights for and do the interviews and find the artists and everything. So this Florida one is the latest one, and we're pretty chuffed to be able to put that one out because that's taken ages to get that together. Some of the other ones we've done. This one here is one of the compilation that Quantic endorsed for us, which is the world's rarest funk 45s. And this has got a lot of 45s on there that are just really rare, where there's like, you know, there's one known copy in the world or just a handful or something like that. And we put the best of those onto this CD. Like I say, like I was saying earlier, you know, a lot of rare funk 45s or rare 45s for that matter, they can be rubbish. There might only be one known copy, but if it's no good, there's no point in valuing it or putting it onto a CD. So these ones, we just take the ones that are the best ones and the rarest at the same time and put them onto the CD. And again, you know, we find the artists and get the photographs of them and do interviews with them so that the story's told. But that's just one aspect of the stuff. You know, we don't just do the funk things. We basically try and represent a lot of that because no one else is doing it. But on the Jazzman label, we try and put a variety of music on that label, such that it's not just funk singles. We put some jazzy ones, some fusion ones, some disco type ones, some 60s mod ones, some weird things that, you know, that are pretty much uncategorizable, and just put a massive variety of things on that label. And so on that label, we've got some CDs that we've done that compile the various A-sides and B-sides of the singles. So we've got this one, Soul Freedom. This has got, in fact, I'll read the blurb on it. Madcap library grooves, breathtaking female soul, spaced out cosmic jazz, heavy deep funk, and rarest of rare grooves. So it's got a wide variety of stuff on there. But the common denominator with all the singles is that they're all pretty obscure, they're all hard to find, but they're all good. They're all worthy of being taken out of obscurity and released for the first time in a proper context in that sense. This is an example, you could say that. This is some Egyptian music that was recorded in 1972. And this one is the next single we're putting out. A whole album of this stuff has come out recently. And this is like a classic example of what I'm talking about, where what the hell is Egyptian jazz music doing? I mean, who even thought that such thing existed, especially stuff that's pretty listenable and danceable even. So let's play this, see how this comes out. So there's some Egyptian jazz for you all. So that was Salaraga from Egypt, and like I was saying, if obscure records like that never get reissued, then never going to get heard. And I think that musically is valid for a lot of people now who are listening to music, not just American stuff, but European stuff and stuff from all over the world. Because there's good music from all over the world. It just takes a bit of time to dig the stuff out. The stuff we do is not just oddball stuff like that. We do some straight ahead stuff as well. This thing, Hercules Bar and Neville, is definitely worth putting out the 7 again. Stick something else on. There's another one. That was an example of some soul music. This is some New York Latin from Ricardo Marrero. Should I say, from New York. One thing about that guy, Ricardo Marrero, is that his master tapes were stolen from one of the employees in the studio, and they were basically, and the whole thing was released without his knowing. So, it's funny little stories like that I find really interesting, and they're the sort of things we write about in the booklets. Otherwise, if you did hear the record, you'd just hear the record, you wouldn't know anything about the producer, the musician at all. And I think it's pretty valid to hear the stories of the musicians who've got to say about the music that they made as well, rather than purely just the music that they made and not knowing anything about them. So it's pretty important for us to write about this sort of stuff in the CDs.
When you find the music, do they have the masters still, or are you mastering off the 7?
A bit of both. A lot of the time we have to take it off the vinyl because the tapes that they originally recorded on, either they deteriorated or they just get lost over the years. And once the record's been pressed, the tape's superfluous. A lot of the time they've got rid of it or just lost it for whatever reason. It's a bit of a shame, but anyway.
You wanted to play this Let's Mbulu track, which we don't have on vinyl, but it's off the CD, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
this
I
is a
don't know how to
popular
work
one.
that thing. You have to.
It
do
was
for me.
it was bootlegged quite a lot in the 90s, but then you put it out legitimately towards the end, right?
Yes. We flipped it with Loris Alessandro. We try and make a theme of the singles that we put out so that there's, like that particular one's got 2 female vocals on each side. The Ricardo Moreno we just played, we had a different version of that song on the other side. So, they both got a theme. So you get, 2 songs on each side rather than most B-sides of singles where they just put in a filler track. So, yeah. Pretty popular one, this Let Mabula. We sold quite a few copies of this. Yeah, go for it.
So, question time. Any questions? Oh, straight away. We got a mic.
Hello.
Hello.
Actually, I'm also having the same disease as you, but with disco records, original disco records. But I used to collect a little bit of funk also, and of course, Cap Darch is one of the real men who is a very special, in the area of funk collectors and disco lovers. And there is a rumor that he, with his biggest collection, he has started to sell his records because he got fed of it. And he said, why don't, actually, he said something like, it's time for me to, to get my living out of these records. I'm tired of it, and I think it will be great because he could just sell each record, every record, and just,
He's sold them
go
already.
to Miami every week.
He's sold a lot of his records already because, I don't know, I think he needed the money. I think he's just had certain personal problems, so he's put a lot of his records on, there's a new type of dub plate where it's etched into plastic rather than lacquer, and so a lot of his records he's already got rid of and used the money to put his records onto these plastic vinyl dub plate things, and so he DJs mostly off those now. But he doesn't really spend his big money like he used to. He's got a notorious reputation for having raised the prices of a lot of records by just proclaiming to everyone, I'll pay more money than anyone else for rare records. And so that's one reason why he got the big collection and the rarities that he did. He was probably actually responsible for the huge price rise in funk records in the 90s. It's all Kev Darge's fault. And he'll admit it, it's all his fault.
Is there, amongst the community of record dealers and record collectors, do you help each other out, or is it really competitive?
It used to be competitive. We help each other out now a lot more. There was one time, for instance, when Kev used to cover records up so that no one else would know what they were. So he'd be the only person to be able to DJ it, and like I was saying earlier. And then Malcolm Cato, who also had a lot of rare records as well, went round his house and said, oh, what are they? And Kev said, oh, I won't tell you. And Malcolm said, oh, I'm not telling you what mine are either then. So when you get 2 people doing that, you might as well go at that. And so they both took off their cover-ups and revealed to each other what they were, and then they both win because they can both go out and get those records. And but the thing is, because they're rare, doesn't mean to say you can just walk to your local shop and just buy them. You have to hunt them down. So it's self-defeating, really, covering things up, because if you do that and everyone else does that, you're never going to learn, no one's ever going to make new discoveries, no one's ever going to find out about anything, no one's ever going to play any new records. So by aiding people and showing people what you've got, then it will help you as well, because if you show one person your rare record, or if you show 10 people, then 10 people will show you, so you end up getting 10 new pieces of information, if you like, as opposed to none at all. So it's so much more sensible to share the knowledge, it really is. And like I was saying before, it's just the decent thing, if you like, because like I was saying, the artist didn't make the music in the first place to give to one person so they could keep it a secret. It's not really very respectful, I don't think.
With the sevens that you're reissuing now, what sort of run would you do of those? How many?
I start off with 1,000 now. A few years ago, they were a lot more popular. I was doing 2,000,
Yeah.
and but now I just do 1,000. And
Okay.
if I need to repress, then I've got an option to do that.
Yeah. And are there, like, what proportion of those would you actually go into repress on?
Well, I pretty much know. I mean, every 3 or 4 records, I'll put something out that is blatantly commercial to pay for the ones which every 3 or 4 records aren't commercial. So, for instance, I deliberately did Marlena Shaw, California Soul, because I knew I'd sell shitloads of copies.
Yeah.
On the other hand, soon after that, I did some folky one from Canada that I thought hardly anyone's going to buy this, but I knew that the people that would buy it would be really, really, really grateful that I had done it because they would have been really into it. It's just that they're in the minority. So the minority records are paid for by the majority ones, and so I deliberately do some that I know I'm going to sell a lot of to pay for the ones that I know that I'm not going to sell a lot of, but nevertheless still deserve to get a release. And I got the idea of that from Blue Note Records, actually. They used to do the same. They'd deliberately do something like Sidewinder or Song for My Father, knowing they're going to sell loads, and then use the money from that to be able to pay for the Ornette Coleman and the free jazz things that they knew wouldn't sell hardly any, but they nevertheless thought deserved a place in the market because they were still valid as pieces of music. It's just that they weren't going to sell loads and loads of copies.
For sure. So I've just got one more as well. When you're going through the mastering process, like mastering it to re-release it, you know, how much or how often would you go through any kind of restoration sort of process of the recording?
If we take it from a tape, it's a lot easier than taking it from vinyl. And if we take it from vinyl, that's it can be difficult, but technology is pretty good now. You know, there's programs that get rid of crackle, programs that get rid of hiss, programs that get rid of pops, and if you've got a good engineer with a good ear, then you can get rid of all of that noise. And a few years ago, it was a lot more difficult, but it's a lot better now. And once you got rid of that, you can EQ it to make it sound half decent. There's one issue of contention, and that is if you've got a record that originally sounded pretty bad because it was mastered badly or mixed badly, the question now is, what do I do? Do I make it sound as true to the original as it was, even if it sounded rubbish? Or do I try and change it now with the use of modern technology and make it sound how they would have liked to have it had it sound back in those days? And so that's an issue that I'm always trying to contend with, and I never really get to the grips with that. You know, I never really get a proper answer in myself. I mean, what would you do?
What's your I don't know.
I don't know. Everyone's got different ideas, so I don't know. I don't know. There's no real answer for that, is there?
For sure. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. I have a couple questions. I heard a rumor when I was asking when I first started sort of collecting records just from thrift shops and stuff. If something says it's an original release, but there's like print through at the beginning, do you know what I mean? Does that mean that it is actually not really the original release, that it's been reprinted from the tape after it's sat for a while?
So how do you mean by print through?
Like print through, like when you hear when say tape's been wrapped the wrong way and a little bit of the original audio signal has been pressed onto the beginning of the vinyl. You know how sometimes you hear, does that mean that that's not the original pressing?
Are you talking about singles or LPs?
Just anything that's pressed to a record.
I think that happens just as a matter of the way that the tape's been rolled up. Sometimes
but isn't the tape
through.
Doesn't it take time for that to happen? So does that mean that, say something says it's an original release, or is that like a second release of something like?
Not necessarily, because sometimes something could have been recorded and not actually mastered or cut or until months after it was recorded. So the tape could have been sat on the shelf. I've come across records where it was recorded in '72 but only released in '76. So that's 4 years difference. In 4 years, that may have had that print through time that you're talking about. On the other hand, it could just be down to the conditions that the tape was stored in, so that. But I don't think it really would. I don't think you could infer that something's been repressed just because you have that little bit of sound at the beginning or not. Usually, things, especially singles, were never really repressed, and if they did, they would have been done with a different color label or different matrix number or something. And you can look on the internet or look in various books, like there's a Swiss book called The Funk Lexicon, written by a guy called Peter Wermelinger. You know that? Yeah, and he's written the actual matrix numbers around the labels, so you can tell what the original pressing is of a lot of these records.
And thank you. Have you also started, do you go to like record labels and stuff and go into the storage and go through their old tape and print?
Yeah, usually the people that we're dealing with a lot of the time, they're just individuals. They just happen to have been in a band 30 odd years ago or whatever, and they're usually private individuals now rather than record companies, because the records that we're interested in are the small labels, the independents that may have only had like 1 or 2 releases, and so they're not really like record companies anymore. Occasionally record companies will have archives of tapes, but they're pretty rare, because a lot of the singles that we're interested in, by the very nature of their being obscure, means that there's only a handful of releases on the label, and because of that, they just never developed into fully fledged record companies that have got a huge back catalogue. And if they did, they would have been eaten up by someone like Universal by now.
Does the tape actually follow, like, I don't know, I'm sorry, I'm asking a lot of questions.
By shedding, you mean?
Yeah, just, do you have to, like, it's like a one-shot deal where, like, that tape's going to fall apart by the end of it if you don't?
Yeah, it has happened.
Is it stressful?
Where they snap or they stretch, because, you know, they're very fragile, they haven't been used in years and years. But it's actually, the tapes in the 80s that are the worst. Before the 60s and 70s ones are all right. It's the tapes in the late 70s or the 80s that are worse for shedding. But having said that, you know, there's a process that where you put them into an oven and you bake them in special places that do that, and they bake it's the adhesive that sticks the actual metal particles to the actual base of the tape that comes apart, and it bakes it so that it sticks it back together again. And it can be pretty effective, and you get a pretty good sound out of the tape in the end.
So you have to cook the reel-to-reel tape, basically.
Yeah, not in your oven at home. There's special places that do it, but it can only be done once. Once it's done, and you've done the transfer, it's knackered. You can't really use it again after that. But once it's been done and digitized, and then it's kept forever, then it's permanent.
Have you ever come across anything like a fake, like somebody's just released something just recently, but they've tried to make out like it's some really rare old record? Or
what you mean, like someone's just released something now, recorded now, and pretended that it was done from years ago? I don't think you'd be able to, because you can just tell by the sound quality. Because the stuff that was recorded, say 30 years ago, is done on analog equipment, with old microphones, old techniques. And I can tell a mile off if it's being done now. I've heard so many old records. You know, occasionally I might get tricked a bit, but it'd be pretty difficult, I think, now, because you'd have to record it not just with the old equipment, but in the old manner, with the old techniques and everything as well. And it would have to be mastered and pressed and everything in the old way. And the sound you get now of doing things is totally different to the sound of how things recordings were done back in the old days. A lot different.
I'm also wondering, do you ever find that, like, you hear a sample in a song that you know hasn't been cleared, and do you ever get into the legalities of that, or do people ever call you up and be like, do you know what I mean? Because being with your incredible wealth of knowledge, I'm sure you recognize samples a lot more than most people would.
Kind of. I mean, not that many people use samples now, and the people that do are quite high profile, and they'll clear it. Like the Talib Kweli one we mentioned earlier, that was cleared through us. If he used that and sold a hell of a lot of records as a result of not having cleared it, then I would have, obviously done something about it, because it means that there's people down the line that being exploited for the music that they've released that they're not getting compensated for. If it's just a local record or someone doing a mixtape or something that's not really, in the great scheme of things, of huge significance, then it doesn't really matter, does it? I don't really think it's an issue.
You've never like sort of caught someone or anything like that?
There's some issues that we've had where people have bootlegged things that we've got an interest in the copyright in, and we have to call them up and tell them off, sort of thing. Yeah, and there's a few things where it's gone a bit further than that, but generally it's in the past. Those things. A lot of people that do little bootlegs like that, they're just small fly-by-night operations. They'll sell like 500 or 1,000 copies. You don't know who did it. There's nothing you can do about it. But people who try and sell thousands and thousands of copies and try and pass them their reissues off as being legal, there's not very many of them, luckily, but they're people that I'm not too keen on, and I'll try and do something if I can. But generally, you can't find out who they are, and if you can, there's not a lot you can do about it anyway. But I have actually, had to do a few things like that, yeah. Because, you got to protect your copyrights. It's as simple as that. I'm sure that everyone out there who makes music, and if you'd release something on a CD and someone else put it out without your permission, you wouldn't be too happy about it, especially if they're making a lot of money out of it. You wouldn't be happy about it at all, regardless of how old it is. Even in 20 years' time, if you hear your music that you made now in 20 years' time being used by someone else, sampled or reissued, and you hadn't heard about it and someone just told you, and you hadn't been told, or notified or paid, then you're not going to be too happy.
What about with someone who's bought a really rare record from you that's then put it onto the internet or something like that, made it available for download or?
Well, I know a couple of sites that have done that anyway, and again, it depends on the scale. If it's a small scale, or if they're not making a hell of a lot of money out of it, then it doesn't really matter. It's just for fun. Or like some of the artists, for instance, we've met, have pointed out the fact that there's a site called funk45.com, and on it it's just like a database with lots and lots of sound clips. And some of them have said, look, we don't like the fact that our record's being represented on this. We're not getting paid for it and everything. And we're like, well, it's just a 1-minute clip, and the guy's doing it. He actually has to pay to do it. He's not making any money out of it, and it's just spreading to the world the fact that this record is out there and that it exists and it's not doing any harm. It's just like a library. And so that's one end of the spectrum where I find it doing more good than harm. But on the other hand, if someone's literally done it just to make money out of it without having paid any copyright fees or anything like that, and trying to do it on quite a large scale, then that's right the other end of the scheme. And that's where I don't think it should be allowed.
Are you pretty near and dear to the exclusivity of having these records be rare? Would you ever put them on the internet as a means to make money?
What, you mean me put them on the internet?
Yeah, like as opposed to selling records, like add it to a part of your shop, like I saw on your website, you can add to cart or whatever. Would you ever consider selling singles as MP3s that are records you've put?
Yeah, some of them we have got the copyright where they're available for download on some service or other. I can't remember which one it is. But the idea really is to make sure that the music that we've spent a lot of time to uncover is basically represented properly in the media, whether it's on a record, on a CD, or on download, and that the appropriate royalties filter down to whoever owns the copyright. So the money that we get from making these CDs and the 45s is contractually obliged to filter down as proper royalties the people who actually made the music, or the producers, or the record company, whoever owns it in the first place, regardless of whether it's released on the internet or on a CD or on a 45. Makes no difference to the format, really. As long as they get their royalties and what's due to be paid to them at the end of the day, that's the important thing.
And actually, I would like to put a small comment. You've mentioned that maybe it's not that smart to pay a lot of money for one certain particular record, just because you like it and you have to, maybe try to find another place where you can buy for $2. But you know what? Just 5 years ago, I met those British guys, Karminski Experience. Maybe you know them.
Yeah.
And they are collecting like 60 strange, weird sounds, and this incredible, strange music. And we went to the store in Moscow, and they actually found like 5 records that I really liked, but the store was quite expensive. And they didn't buy it, because they said, wow, I think I wouldn't buy it for $50 or something. And I think, why actually you cannot pay some kind of price for the record you really like, and you know that the record is very rare, and it is very difficult to evaluate actually the sound, the cost of the sound. But I believe that if you really like something, if you really need it, and actually the sound is very rare, it's a certain quantity of copies, why can't you? Isn't this, I think, what is not smart? Just to forget about the record just because it costs more than you expected.
It's true. Well, maybe they didn't have much money with them at the time or something. I mean, everyone's got a limit for a record. Some people specifically say, right, I will not pay more than £10 or £20 or £100 for any record, no matter how much you like. It's just a means of keeping control of their finances. So everyone's got a limit on what they want to spend on something. Like, they may really, really have liked that record, but like I say, it may have been over that limit, or they may have liked another record just as much that cost half the price. So everyone's different. Everyone's got their own means of assessing the value of how much they want to pay for something, even if something's below market value. I mean, supposing that record was £100, but everyone in the world sells it for 500. That means what they're getting is a bargain in essence. It's like £400 cheaper than what the going rate is, but they may still not have bought it because of the fact that it's above their limit. On the other hand, they might have bought it knowing they could sell it for 500. So everyone's got their own reasons for wanting to buy stuff or at a certain price or not. Usually, if people say they've got a limit, say £100, whatever, to buy a record, then it doesn't really mean much, because you only have to offer them something that they really, 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 really want for £103, and they'll probably buy it for £3 more than their limit. And then it just never stops, and it could be 110, it could be, it just goes on forever. Or especially if it's worth a lot more, and then they could buy it, justifying it by saying they could sell it for a lot more. So, everyone says they've got limits, but I don't believe it really for that reason.
And the last thing, actually, I have to thank you for putting Marlena Show, California Soul on your label. Because now all my friends, they also into this tune, and it's incredible.
Yeah, it's a good one, that's for sure.
Thanks.
Question, while you were researching the music of this time frame, did you discover anything about studio techniques or miking techniques?
Yeah, Malcolm, who works with me, he's a drummer. He did one of the Red Bull workshops a couple of years ago, and he's actually built himself a studio using a lot of old gear from the 60s and the 50s. And so whenever we go together to meet a lot of the guys, especially the producers, he asks a lot about the techniques. And sometimes he's bought some equipment from them and found out about how to do it. Personally, I don't have too much of an interest in it because I'm too busy doing other stuff as well. But he's learned quite a lot about it, especially about mic placement for drums, because there's definitely an art in it that has been lost, I think, over the years, because basically people don't record bands so much in studios like they did in the past, and people obviously don't use tape these days like they used to, and a lot of the other equipment, whether it's compressors or valve EQs or whatever, there's so much stuff now that it's all done on computer. So a lot of the techniques are being lost these days, definitely, yeah. I wish I knew a bit more about it myself, but I've never really had need to know it myself, so it's sort of gone a bit over my head when they're talking about it together,
But with this whole resurgence with Quantic and and stuff like that now coming out with that sort of like trying to trace back that sort of sound. You think it's renewed interest in 7 inches again? Like I know a lot of friends who like maybe in the last 3 to 4 years start going back to 7 inches because they sort of learned and discovered true music by Quantic and True Thoughts and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think there is to a certain extent. A lot of people, they may have heard, say, a 7-inch for the first time or an old funk single for the first time, and they're captivated by, because it is a different sound. You know, you don't get the dynamics that you get on a digital sound or a CD. And to some people, they may not like it as much. Other people are like, wow, I've never heard anything like that before. It sounds really fresh to their ears. Yeah. And so they're really keen on it. And you know, they'll start, you know, looking into trying to get that sort of sound and trying to record like that now.
That's true.
I think that a lot of the benefits of that sound have been lost over the years, especially. I don't know, in a lot of ways it sounds quite authentic and
Nostalgic?
Nostalgic in a way, but you know, it's only nostalgic if you've heard it before. If you've never heard it before, then you've got nothing to compare it to. But it just sounds new in a way because a lot of people now, they've only heard music that has been done digitally or through a computer. So if you're hearing an analog recording for the very first time and hearing it on vinyl, then it sounds totally different to you, and it does sound fresh and it does sound new. And even though it is actually being done before, it's been done, you know, for years and years before, it just hasn't been done in a modern context.
Yep.
So, you know, it's the old, you know, from the 60s and 70s being played now and coming into the fore now.
I wonder how it is for you, like when you listen to all of this at home, like the sound quality of all of this, and then when you switch on the radio and you hear all this digital stuff, like how's it feel? I mean, like for your ears maybe.
I think a lot of it sounds really, really good, but it doesn't get inside me. I mean, a lot of it, I think, wow, I mean, like I listened to a friend of mine who's put this new system in his car, and the bass is like, you know, so deep, it's like under the ground, and the treble is like, and it sounds awesome, but it doesn't. But for my ears, it doesn't get inside my bones. I don't feel it as much. I just think, oh yeah, that's technically pretty good, but I don't feel it in terms of, you know, I would do normal music where I try and imagine the band playing. I don't. I can't imagine a drummer playing a kick drum or a bass player playing the bass so low that it's like that. So it doesn't seem real to me. For me personally, to appreciate music properly, I've got to imagine it being real, played by people. And but you know, that's just my personal viewpoint. The music that I really like and enjoy and feel passionate about is, you know, the human touch of music like that. Music that is artificially created, if you like. I just don't, you know, it sounds nice and everything, but it doesn't. I just don't feel it.
It's obviously very important for you to give back to the artists their dues and that kind of thing. Has there ever been a situation where you've may have sort of reopened some old wound or something like that? For example, some artist has been ripped off by their label, you know, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, or something like that, and you know, you've come along and re-released their stuff, and the label owner says, hey, that, you know, that's actually, you know, I want my cut of that or whatever.
Yeah, sometimes. Yeah, it can be tricky sometimes because on some occasions, you know, you do open up a can of worms where you're talking to someone who says, oh, I'm the copyright owner, and, you know, pay me the money. And then you talk to the guitarist and they say, oh no, it was me. And then you talk to the drummer and they say, no, it was me. And they all start arguing and everything. And on other occasions, there's, you know, for instance, that the record we played earlier, the Universals, the New Generation one. What happened with them is they saved up the money together, they made the records, and the records got sent from the distributor to the stores, but somewhere along the line they got lost. And so the records never actually turned up, and so they'd spent all this money for nothing, and they just disappeared somewhere. They don't even know if they were properly pressed. So that's a band that, you know, that didn't have a hell of a lot of money to start off with and wasn't really very commercially successful, and they put all their money into this venture for nothing. So, you know, they in effect got completely stitched up and ripped off by whoever was making the records for them. So they're pretty chuffed for 30 years on for it to actually get released again properly. And but like I was saying earlier as well, you know, some people expect that they are thinking I'm trying to get them to pay me to be able to have the record put on the CD. You know, they're just appreciative to have it put out in the first place.
Is that maybe indicative of more of a Wild West attitude back in the day? Or?
Yeah, it was. It could have been. Yeah, it was pretty bad back in the. I mean, there's no rules back in those days. You know, the music business. It really was. A tricky industry to be in. You know, there was a lot of sharks out there. I mean, it's still bad now, obviously, but in those days there were a lot less collection societies, and there was a lot less regulation going on. It was normal to pay the DJ a backhander to play your record on the radio. You had to use your wit and imagination, hustling, skill, whatever, to get your record out there, or to get pressed in the first place. You know, there's a lot. You know, it's a tricky business, just like it is now. You know, to get your record heard as opposed to someone else's. Yeah, a lot of hustling going on.
For sure. Sorry, I'm hogging the mic. Sorry, people. Just another question. Have any of the artists that you've re-released, like I know you said, you know, you found them in nursing homes and stuff like that, but has it maybe reignited an opportunity for them to tour or to, you know, come out of retirement or something like that?
I wish I could. I mean, I've tried to organise some things like that. There's one band that springs to mind, it's the Soul Tornadoes. They were based in Akron in Ohio. It was two brothers, one played bass, the other played organ. And we said, well, look, you know, why don't you get together, we'll bring you over to England and record. And so I paid for some of them. One of the other guys is in California, so I paid them to get together, do the rehearsals and everything. And but the problem with main problem is it's all about money. I mean, this at the end of the day is minority music. It's not going to sell shitloads of copies. It's not going to make millions of pounds doing it. So to be able to get a band and afford for them to fly all the way to the UK and get gigs there to make it cost effective, it's not easy at all. And I've tried to do it, but the sums don't really add up, unfortunately. You can get maybe one person over, say a singer, but even then you're only going to get like 1 or 2 gigs. And my forte is not promoting. That's another kettle of fish altogether. I'll do enough as it is, you know. So to be able to promote concerts and bands and gigs and what have you is something else entirely. So much as I'd like to get people over, a whole band, or even not just a band but a singer, is quite a difficult thing to do. So the best that I've been able to do is basically pass on the details of some of these people to Aidan Gibson at a jazz cafe, because he's one of the main people interested in doing this sort of thing, and saying, look, if you want to get so-and-so over, here's the number, give them a call and get them to come over. And this November we're getting Robert Moore, who's a soul singer from Florida. He's coming over to perform. And to help pay for it, Aidan's getting him to record with Speedometer to actually put a single out as well, and trying to get them 2 gigs instead of just 1. So, you know, it's much as the intention's there, it's not easy, especially because, you know, mostly because of the plane flights and everything and the expense involved. But otherwise, I'd love to get more people over. I mean, some people, it has worked really well, like Marlena Shaw, she comes over regularly now. People like Spanky Wilson that Quantic's been getting involved with. Gwen McRae, she comes over quite a lot. So some of them do get quite a good reputation and are able to come to the UK and do a little mini tour or go around Europe. But like I say, you know, it's not something that I've got the time really to get involved with, you know.
Yeah, I'm curious to know, over the past number of years, we've had quite a few of the massive old jazz labels like Impulse and Blue Note and Verve and like open up their back catalogue for remixes and stuff. Just wondering how you are with that as a concept, or are you happy to let it go, or is it sort of a bit sacrilege?
I haven't actually heard any of them, so I wouldn't really. Don't really know. But if it's anything to do with keeping the music alive, then I'm all for it. Just because the records are like made 20 or 30 or 40 years ago doesn't mean to say that they should be overlooked. If you haven't heard it before, then it's new as far as I'm concerned, whether it was recorded yesterday or 50 years ago. So a lot of people complain about old music. They say, oh, it doesn't sound new, it doesn't sound modern or anything. But if you haven't heard it, then you can't really say that, because it's not old music. It's still be new to your ears. But if it does need the modern touch to be able to get it to people's ears, then I think it's a good thing, in the sense that it will certainly make people realise that there is old music out there, even if it has been modernised, and it may turn people on to looking back into the past and seeing what other stuff has been back then, and appreciating it for what it is as well. Especially if you hear them both side by side.
Have you had any situations where the material that you've put out on Jazzman has come up with like master tapes that people have been interested in, stepping up to that?
Well, we did. Quantic did a remix of that. The very first song we played earlier, Sometimes I Feel Like Motherless Child, Quantic did a remix of that. That's the only thing we've done in that sense. Some people have asked us to do things like that. Generally, I don't really have the time to follow it through, quite honestly. I mean, there's so many things going on, and these projects where people say, oh, can I remix this or what have you, it's not really top of my agenda. I've just got too much other work to do to keep putting new things out rather than remixing old things, and I'd have to think of a whole new format and label to put it on and what have you. And if they want to do it, then they can do it. But I'm not really. I don't really have the time really to go in that direction myself.
Cheers.
Hey, I imagine you've been involved with some pretty serious sort of record trades over the years. Have you got any good stories about
Record trades? Well, trades by their nature, they're not really. I don't know. I think there's some good record buying stories where you find hordes of records and they're going really cheap because the guy doesn't know what they are or something. But trades, most people know what they are in the sense that if you're trading records, you pretty much know what you're doing. You're not going to trade a really rare record for something that's rubbish, and vice versa. But probably the best record find ever was a master tape of Mick in the Soul Generation, which we found in Texas. No one even knew it existed, and I pulled it out, and it said complete album on there. And that was just one of those things that makes you sink to your knees and your heart start pumping, because it's like, oh my, I found a whole album by this legendary band that no one knew existed. I mean, that was a pretty good find for digging. That's amazing when that sort of thing happens, Buying records and what have you, I don't know. I've been ripped off just like everyone else has been, but for every time I've been ripped off, I've had a good result myself, by finding something worth a lot of money that the guy only wants $5 for or something too. But when it comes to the ethics of that, like I was saying earlier, if the artist is selling his own records, you can't pay them cheap money for stuff. You have to give them a proper price. But the way to do it is if the guy is actually in the business of selling records, like if he's in a store or if he's a dealer and he wants $5 for a record that is worth $100, then there's nothing wrong with that as far as I'm concerned, because that's his business to know. But an artist, it's not his business to know the value of his records. So but most people are pretty clued up now anyway. The internet's changed it. And PopSpsych and eBay have sort of leveled the prices up for a lot of records.
Okay, Gerald Jazzman, thank you very much.
Thank you.